If you work in software development here in the 2020s, you probably do some kind of agile, or at least you're told you do it. Agile software development is an iterative approach to software delivery that builds software incrementally from the start of a project rather than delivering it all once you get to the end. But where did this almost religious practice come from? How did we get to the point of all standing around a Jira board every morning and guessing story points? Well, today we're going to be looking at the history of Agile. This is an accurate representation, by the way, of a stand-up happening in medieval times. Look at them all with their little medieval Kanban board. But anyway, yeah, today is about history. And it's a history that takes us all the way from the offices of shirt-wearing software developers in the 1990s to the sleek, fast-moving teams that we see today. Not just in tech, but in industries you'd never expect it. Yes, this is Agile with a capital A, the development approach that went from being an underdog idea to a global game changer. So let's start back in the 1990s. The world of the software developer was, well, let's just say, if you think your Monday morning meetings are a drag, you would not have survived in tech in the 1990s. The process then was known as waterfall, and it wasn't a peaceful, relaxing kind of waterfall with actual water. No, this was more like standing at the bottom of Niagara Falls with a bucket, hoping to catch enough water for a shower. The waterfall method meant that you had to plan everything from the start to the finish before a single line of code was written. So imagine building an IKEA cabinet with 200 pages of instructions, but you're only being allowed to touch the first page for the next 6 months. Developers were, in one word, miserable. But out of this chaos came a group of developers who were tired of this clunky bureaucratic process. People like Jeff Sutherland and Ken Schwaber. They were saying, hey, there's got to be a better way of doing this. So they got to work. They started experimenting with methods that allowed for smaller, more manageable chunks of work. And they even did something a bit novel. They actually talked to their teams and their stakeholders. So fast forward to the winter of 2001, and we're in a ski resort in Utah. 19 developers gather around a fireplace. Yes, seriously, this really happened. But instead of hot chocolate and songs by the fire, these folks were hashing out ideas that would forever change how teams build software. They wrote it all down and it became the Agile Manifesto. Now, the Agile Manifesto wasn't some 1,000-page technical manual. It was surprisingly simple, just 68 words, 4 main values and 12 principles that emphasise things like the individuals and interactions over processes and tools, and responding to change over following a plan. It was a rallying cry for developers. They're basically saying we're done with the old way. We want flexibility, we want collaboration, and we want to stop working weekends just to patch up the mess left behind by outdated project plans. So how did Agile go from an idea to a way of working that we know and love today? Well, after that winter in 2001, the principles of the Agile Manifesto began to seep into the practices of forward-thinking developers and project managers. So adopting these new concepts required overcoming deep-seated resistance in the industry. You see, the 1990s were dominated by traditional management philosophies. They had rigid hierarchies and they had really deep trust in step-by-step planning. Agile's emphasis on adaptability and team autonomy was in many ways countercultural at the time. The first real proving ground for Agile came from smaller teams in progressive tech companies that didn't have the luxury of sticking to long drawn-out timelines. So startups in Silicon Valley started experimenting with these principles. They started blending them with iterative methods that had already been showing promise. So something called rapid application development, and then there was also extreme programming. These are kind of like the precursors to Agile. These practices emphasize continuous testing, frequent iterations, and customer feedback. Sound familiar? Extreme programming in particular championed this idea of pair programming and test-driven development, where 2 developers would code together to ensure quality from the get-go. And that was actually a radical shift from the siloed approach of waterfall project management. But it wasn't just the small teams catching on, larger organisations were watching and learning. Jeff Sutherland and Ken Schwaber, they formalised what they had been experimented in, the first iteration of the SCRUM framework, with clear roles in it like Scrum Master and concepts such as the product backlog and the daily stand-up. Scrum provided an actionable way to implement Agile's philosophies, and it was a lightweight, flexible, and most importantly, it delivered results faster. Adoption spread as the stories of success trickled into the industry's mainstream. So while companies like Microsoft started seeing tangible improvements, projects were completed on time, teams felt less burnt out, and customer satisfaction was rising. Agile then stopped becoming just a niche idea, and it started to get some serious attention. Conferences dedicated to Agile methodologies popped up, and early adopters shared their case studies and their triumphs, basically. Frameworks like Kanban also entered the spotlight afterwards, so that brings a visual approach to managing work in progress. Kanban originated from Toyota's manufacturing process. Kanban boards helped teams visualize tasks. It helped them set limits on work in progress, and it helped them identify bottlenecks with a lot more ease. So combining these practices with the Agile mindset, teams are equipped more than ever to stay nimble and to stay effective. But transitioning to Agile wasn't just a matter of flicking a switch. For many large legacy organizations, rolling out Agile meant deep cultural shifts. It involved retraining teams and shifting the focus from rigid timelines and deliverables that could be adjusted based on real-time feedback. Managers had to learn to let go of their need for top-down control and embrace servant leadership, which is where the job became one really of removing roadblocks from their teams rather than dictating every move. I've been an engineering manager for many years now, and I always try to go for this servant leadership approach where I'm not telling people what to do, I'm trusting people to use their own judgment, and my role is to remove blockers from them. So while Agile started with software, its flexible nature meant that it could adapt to other fields as well. So by the mid-2000s, marketing teams were picking up Agile principles, and that helped them plan and execute their marketing campaigns a lot faster. Agencies adopted sprint planning to break down projects into some more manageable pieces that could be tested and adapted based on performance data. By the 2010s, even industries like education and non-profit management had seen teams running daily stand-ups and discussing what did we accomplish yesterday and what's the plan for today. So these developments weren't without challenges though. Misinterpretations and misunderstandings led to what many call agile theatre. So you probably recognise this, right? That's when you go through the motions without really embracing the principles behind them. Teams would tick the boxes, they'd do a stand-up, they'd do a sprint review, but they don't really have that true collaboration or that willingness to pivot when they need to. So the words became buzzwords essentially attached from their meaning, and that's why Agile sometimes has a bit of a negative reputation. But despite all of that, Agile movement's momentum does keep going strong. The beauty of Agile was in its ability to evolve. So new methodologies like Scaled Agile Framework or SAFe, they emerged to help large enterprises apply Agile across multiple teams and maintain alignment without stopping flexibility. As Agile matured, it wasn't just about breaking away from the waterfall method, it was actually about integrating continuous learning and continuous improvement into our company's DNA. So there are a lot of startups now that have only ever used Agile. When Agile's done right, it's not just a methodology, it's a whole mindset. And that is what's keeping it thriving today, over 20 years after that group of software developers got together in a ski lodge and they said, we can do better. So next time you see a company touting their new Agile approach to product launches, just remember, all of this started with a bunch of actual software developers in a simple manifesto, and it dared to make things a little bit waterfall and a little bit, more Agile.